Hey Karl, mind if we talk for a bit? I have an absolutely ridiculous story to tell you about the city that we're both in right now. Berlin. And some of it involves your children, so I figured you might be interested in hearing what they got up to. So when you lived here in the summer of 1837, Germany didn't quite exist as it does today, but you were very familiar with Prussia, seeing that you were one of them. And you would have known the Berlin Palace that's right down the Spree. Well, the Prussians stopped ruling out of that in 1918 for reasons that you would find both interesting and inevitable. But it stayed around. In fact, an attempt to proclaim a social state was made at it. That didn't stick. Then the building was mostly destroyed, and this time a social state came around. And this time they got rid of the building. Mostly. And that state built a new palace on top of that place, one that was their seat of government. Then they ceased to exist, and the new German state came along, knocked down that palace, and built another old new one on top of it. And I can't take you with me on this journey. I think the Germans would actually complain about that. But it's the parts that were saved in the story we can tell about Victor's justice that I can take you along on. So, Karl, I'll be back in a bit, but let's find the pieces of the old Berlin palaces. That of royalty, that of the people, and that still exist in Berlin. So I have a speech impediment that makes it next to impossible for me to say certain words, one of them being the name of the house that ruled over Prussia and then Germany. So let's call them the Hohenzollern's. So they're the people that rule over the place that I'm sitting in right now. If you want details about that, Iron Kingdom by Christopher Clark is amazing. So the Hoosier Huts rule over Prussia and then the German Empire. And their palace was the Berlin Palace. That this is a reconstruction from, and why I'm starting my story right here. World War I happens and it goes bad for Germany, and the Hoosier Huts are chucked out. And Germany is suddenly in limbo, where they still exist, but nobody is quite sure as what. And on 9 November 1918, Germany is declared a republic. Twice. First here at the Reichstag by Philipp Schneiderman. This is the one that would eventually take and become more well-known as the Weimar Republic-ish. But a few hours later, another German republic was proclaimed, this time at the Berlin Palace by Karl Liebknecht, leader of the Marxist-Spartakist-Bund. This obviously didn't take, and Liebknecht would be murdered along with Rosa Luxemburg as part of what could easily be called a civil war or a revolution depending on your political leanings. But what's important to our story is that Liebknecht gave his speech outside of a certain part of the Berlin Palace, the Portal 4. I don't have enough time today to go over the course of German history from this point, but we all know the basics. The Nazis come to power, World War II, the Allies throw them out, Germany's left a ruin of its own making, deal with it. And there are now two Germanys, a right and a left, or a west and an east. And the Berlin Palace is in ruins, and East Germany decided that they wanted to get rid of it. Except, not all of it. Very quickly after East Germany officially became a country. In 1950, the decision was made to get rid of the palace. It was seen as being a symbol of the non-revolutionary nature of Germany's past, a memorial to imperialism. Plus, let's be real, this is a very clear display of we won the right to do this. The revolution that had been attempted in 1919 had finally borne the fruit of the past. And that's important because the revolutionary past that East Germany wanted to pull from would be intertwined with the symbols of the Germany that they left behind. And this includes the Berlin Palace, which is leveled in 1950 and then becomes a parade ground, and then a parking lot. And then in 1960, East Germany replaced their titular president, their head of state, with the Council of State. And as such, they needed a building to house that, and they built it right next to where the former palace was. And the entrance to the building looks very out of place and out of time for a reason. It's from the former Berlin Palace. It was where Karl Liebknecht had proclaimed his republic. And now his door was the entrance to what on paper controlled the state functions of East Germany. There already was a measure of continuity and a message of victory contained in that symbolism. And it's not going to stop there. The parade ground, the empty parade ground right across the street, well, that wasn't always going to remain empty. In fact, a very important bowling alley was about to be built on top of it. So Karl actually came along with me, and this time he brought his friend Fred along for the ride, but he's a bit busy right now, so I'm gonna go sit over on a bench because people might think I'm crazy. So Karl's kids, the communists, they wanted a place to build their own palace. They wanted a place to house their parliament. And frankly, building it over the place of what had once been the seat of destructive imperialist power was a sense of Victor's justice just a bit too sweet to pass up. And while I could describe the building to you, let me read to you how they describe the building. The Palace of the Republic, built from 1973 to 1976, marked the architectural completion of Marx Engels Platz. The impressive building houses the plenary assembly hall of the People's Chamber, the constitutional and legislative body of the German Democratic Republic. Since 1976, the large hall of the building has been the venue for the 5 yearly congresses of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. That's a beagle, by the way. Poor guy. At which the directive decisions for the good of the people and for the maintenance of peace are taken. The hall is also the venue for congresses of the Confederation of Free German Trade Unions, the congresses of the Free German Youth, and the Socialist Unity Party Berlin County Delegate Conferences. The hall also invites to attend festival events, concerts, guest performances by ensembles and soloists, and the popular dances of Berlin's working people. With its various distractions such as the theater and Palast, numerous restaurants, espressos, small bars, and a bowling alley, the Palace of the Republic is a real house of the people, a cheerful, sociable place. Now, there were a bunch of jokes about this building, one of them being that it was Eric's Lampenladen, Eric's lamp store. That was actually quite clever in my opinion. Hey Karl, let me tell you about some of the nicknames for government buildings in my own country sometime. So the Palace of the Republic was exactly that. It was a palace the Republic ruled from, and all of its people were welcome at it. It is a symbol of East Germany, good and bad. And then, East Germany ceases to exist. So, unexpected change of venue. I'm currently in my hotel room, which actually has a really nice view. The reason being that when I was out recording by the palace earlier, I somehow recorded without sound and in slow motion. Anyways, so it was in the Palace of the Republic that East Germany agreed to join West Germany and become, well, Germany. And almost immediately there came calls to tear down the new palace. It was ugly, it was argued, and it stuck out like a sore thumb on Unter den Linden. Plus, communism had lost. Much like how the East Germans had torn down the old palace, so too would the Germans who won the Cold War in what historian David Large has called revenge. Plus, the new Germany argued it was a symbol of communism. Why would you want to keep it? People suffered under that.
Any thoughts you have on that?
Except those who lived under its rule didn't necessarily want it to go away. To quote Large, in 1993, the Berlin Senate made a formal decision to tear down the palace, though no specific demolition date was fixed. This decision generated more opposition than the politicians had bargained for. Former citizens of the German Democratic Republic, along with some sympathetic Westies, mounted a petition campaign to save the palace and flooded the newspapers with protests against the demolition plan. They insisted that the palace had been less a repository of repression than a site of popular amusement. Aussies recalled with fondness the hours they had spent in its restaurants, cafes, and bowling alley. They remembered it as one of the few places in East Berlin where an ordinary citizen could find clean public toilets and functioning east-west telephones. Admittedly, they conceded the palace was a little off-putting aesthetically, but no more so than most of the buildings thrown up in West Berlin during the 1960s and 1970s. Indeed, this faction contended, compared to West Berlin's International Congress Center, which was built at the same time, the palace was downright humane and friendly. Wait, how ugly was that thing? Wait, they kept that? It's further argued that the original palace should have been rebuilt in the first place, that East Germany never should have tore it down. Berlin, it was argued, needed to recapture and rebuild its ties to the further past, and the socialist modernism of the Palace of the Republic needed to be left behind. It's victor's justice. The people that won didn't want a monument left around to the state that they despised. And when you look into the funding of the group that ultimately won out in this fight, it raises further questions about what sort of past Germany wanted to be looking back on. But the continuum of victor's justice continued. Except much like the palace that the palace had replaced, not all of it went away. The nickname, Eric's Lamp Store, came from the very artsy lamps that decorated the interior of the entrance. And while the lights of East Germany went off to never go back on again in East Germany's lights never actually went out. I actually came to Berlin this time mostly to go to a concert at Astra Kulturhaus. It's modeled very much on the East German aesthetic for concert halls, and the lights look very interesting. Because they're from the Palace of the Republic, I was being quite literal about the lights of East Germany never going out. And that's ultimately what I'm getting at. Each successive Germany was intertwined with the Germany that came before it. Hell, if I wanted to be less poetic, there's still literally signs for the Palace of the Republic hanging around the former East Berlin. But I am being poetic. Germany's past is for everyone in it,
part of its present. It's one of the reasons that we study history. And it's a history that has been fought over, torn down, rebuilt, and questioned over what it actually means. And the funny thing is, as controversial as I might have come across in this video, there are plenty of people in Berlin to who these successive rebuildings mean absolutely nothing other than a sign that Berlin is constantly under construction. The politics behind the rebuilding was just something that happened in the background. For them, the world just continues to exist, which is a rather ham-fisted way for me to bring up the Berlin Wall and how it ties into all of this. Famously and without much complaint, those in the East were very okay with the Berlin Wall no longer existing. It was in fact mostly already gone, in fact a lot of it under the hand of the East, before people realized, hey, maybe we should keep aspects of this around. And it isn't lost on me that the new Germany was completely okay with keeping around a memento of what they always portrayed as a prison. But the Palace of the Republic itself wasn't that prison, even though it was the symbol of the government that held those keys. It was more complicated than that. And that's a complication that the world in general has continued to struggle with when it comes to the memory of East Germany, which is where irony just hits me. East Germany struggled for its entire history to incorporate aspects of previous German states that explained the East German state. And I've presented the fairly sympathetic view of them tearing down the old palace as they exercised victor's justice. But literally at the same time that this story was happening, East Germany built a portion of the Berlin Wall over what was the holding cells of the Gestapo. History is messy and complicated. Why do we study it? Because how we build the present is with the past.